Hot Hand moved through the crowd like a ghost, his long coat billowing behind him as he made his way toward the outer banks of town. He didn't run, but every step was measured, every movement calculated. No one stopped him, no one dared. He was Hot Hand, after all. His horse, a strong black stallion named Midnight, was tied up just outside of town, near an old wooden fence. The moment Hot Hand untied the reins, he swung himself into the saddle and spurred the horse forward. Midnight galloped hard, dust kicking up beneath its hooves as they rode north, away from the lights and noise of town. He rode fast, faster than he needed to, but he needed to think. The sun had started its slow descent over the horizon when he reached the hot springs. Nestled between jagged red rocks, the natural pools steamed against the cool evening air. He barely took the time to tie Midnight to the old stump before stripping off his shirt and hat, dropping them carelessly to the ground. Then, with one powerful dive, he plunged into the water. The heat of the spring wrapped around him, soothing his aching muscles, but his mind was anything but at ease. Jack Spade, damn fool! That kid had rushed headfirst into the lion's mouth without so much as a second thought. And now? Now he was chained up in the belly of Pierre Dupuy's fortress, being prepped for God knows what. Hot Hand exhaled sharply and ran a wet hand through his dark hair, floating in the warm water as his thoughts raged like a wildfire. Jack was doomed. Not only had he disrespected Pierre in front of the entire town, but he had also made it clear that he knew Rachel. It wouldn't take long for Pierre's men to figure out he was a stranger, an outsider, someone with no real ties or protection. That was a death sentence. Hot Hand had no obligation to help him. He barely knew the kid. They had met days ago, and Jack had already brought a world of trouble to his feet. The logical thing, the safe thing, was to let it be, to pretend he never met Jack Spade. But when he closed his eyes, he knew the truth. If he rode out of this, if he let that kid hang in the wind, it wasn't just Jack's blood that would be on Pierre's hands. It'd be on his, too. He floated in silence for a long moment, staring up at the stars beginning to dot the darkening sky. Then, slowly, he sat up in the water, wiping the beads of moisture from his face. A deep sigh escaped his lips. "Can't put a price on being able to live with yourself," he muttered. Then, louder, more certain, "I know what I gotta do." Without another thought, he climbed out of the water, shaking off the weight of hesitation with the droplets that rolled down his skin. Jack Spade wasn't going to die in that jail, not if Hot Hand had anything to say about it. The air inside the sheriff's office was thick with sweat, cigar smoke, and the kind of tension that made a man's stomach twist into knots. Jack Spade hung in the center of his small jail cell, shackled to the ceiling by thick iron chains. His arms burned from the strain, his wrists raw from where the metal bit into his skin. A few of Pierre's hired guns, the Silver Spurs, stood outside the bars, grinning as they took turns tossing a knife into the wooden floor, just inches from Jack's dangling feet. "He's a dead man," one of them sneered. "Damn fool touched Pierre's woman," another chuckled, shaking his head. "Ain't gonna be much left of him when the boss is through." Jack tried to block them out. His body ached, his jaw still throbbed from the kick Pierre had landed, and his mind raced through possible ways out of this. Then he heard it. Boots, slow, methodical. A low whistle echoed through the dimly lit hallway, sharp and eerie. Jack's blood turned to ice. Step by step, the sound grew closer, each one heavier than the last. The Silver Spurs outside the cell straightened immediately, standing at attention as the whistling figure came into view. Pierre Dupuy, the man himself, stepped out of the shadows, the dim lantern light flickering against his polished black boots. His suit was immaculate, as always, and he wore a smirk that made Jack's stomach twist. Pierre came to a slow stop just outside Jack's cell, taking a long, calculated look at him. "Mr. Spade," Pierre said, his voice dripping with that deep, raspy French accent. "It seems we have much to talk about." Jack stayed silent, his body tense. Pierre smirked. "My men tell me you are not much obliged to cooperate." He started whistling again, a haunting melody as he motioned for one of his men to open the cell door. The heavy iron door groaned as it swung open. Pierre stepped inside, moving with a slow, deliberate grace. One of his men sat lazily on the guard's desk, but the moment Pierre reached it, he stopped whistling and simply looked at him. Without hesitation, the man stood and moved aside. Pierre reached into his pocket, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with a slow, practiced ease. He inhaled deeply, then exhaled a cloud of smoke before taking the chair in his hands. Jack watched, his breath shallow. Every movement Pierre made was calculated, drawn out, stretching time like an executioner, savoring the moment before the axe fell. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the stone floor echoed in the cell as Pierre positioned it directly in front of Jack. He sat down with a casual ease, crossing one leg over the other as he took another slow drag of his cigarette. Then he blew the smoke right into Jack's face. Jack clenched his jaw. Pierre leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto Jack's. "There isn't anything I do not know inside my town," he said, his voice dipping into something cold, "or around my mine. Anything, Mr. Spade." He took another drag. "But you, my unlucky friend, I do not know you." The words hung in the air like a noose. Jack swallowed hard. Pierre's smirk returned, wider this time. "So," he said, voice sharpening as he leaned in, their faces mere inches apart. "This is the deal I will make with you, Mr. Spade. As you well know, I am a man of business." He let the word roll off his tongue like silk before tapping ash from his cigarette. "The deal is this. I will give you one chance to talk to me directly, to explain to me who exactly you are, why you are in my town, and—" His smile faded, his eyes darkening as he whispered the last question. "What made you think you could ever put a hand on my lady?" The final words came with such quiet venom that Jack felt it sink deep into his gut. Pierre didn't move. He just stared, his dark, soulless eyes drilling into Jack's. Jack's throat was dry. His hands ached in their shackles. He had faced danger before. He had fought, gambled, and scraped by in life. But now he wasn't so sure he was going to make it out of this alive. Pierre remained seated, exhaling another slow drag of his cigarette, letting the tension simmer in the dimly lit jail cell. He studied Jack through narrowed, calculating eyes before finally pushing himself up from the chair. With a flick of his wrist, he motioned to the wiry man standing at his right. "Give him a reason to start talking," Pierre said, his voice low and smooth, as if he were asking for a cup of tea. The man grinned, a grin full of rotten, jagged teeth. His hair was long and scraggly, a greasy mess that hung over his gaunt face. His yellowed eyes gleamed with cruel anticipation. "With pleasure, boss," the creepy guard rasped, taking off his battered hat. He stretched his fingers, each knuckle cracking loudly in the heavy silence. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he approached Jack, licking his lips as if savoring the moment. Jack braced himself. Hot Hand moved through the darkened town like a ghost, slipping through back alleys and clinging to the shadows. He was careful, methodical, never lingering too long in the open, his footsteps silent against the dirt paths. His hat was pulled low, a black cloth covering the lower half of his face. A heavy overcoat concealed the rifle strapped across his back and the twin revolvers holstered at his sides. But it wasn't just the weapons. His entire presence felt dangerous, a coiled serpent ready to strike. He knew this was a gamble. Breaking Jack out meant going to war with Pierre Dupuis. But war didn't scare Hot Hand. Failing himself did. Building by building, he advanced, every muscle in his body primed for action. When he reached the sheriff's office, he crouched low, sticking to the back where the moonlight didn't touch. He peered through the barred windows, scanning for his entry. Then, from inside, a wail. Jack's voice. Hot Hand's jaw clenched. They were working him over. The kid was holding strong, but he didn't have much longer. The first punch landed square in Jack's ribs. A sickening crack echoed through the cell, but Jack refused to give the old bastard the satisfaction of a scream. He grunted, breathing heavily, forcing himself to remain upright, as the scraggly guard chuckled. "That's a tough one, boss," the guard sneered over his shoulder. "Gonna be fun breaking him," Pierre smirked, watching with amusement. "I do hope he makes this easier," he mused. Another punch. Jack's head snapped to the side, blood splattering onto the cold floor. His vision blurred, his entire body screaming in agony. Yet still, he laughed. It was weak, broken, but it was laughter all the same. He lifted his bloodied face and spat at the ground near Pierre's boots. Pierre's smirk faded. "Why?" Jack gasped, panting through the pain. "Why are you doing this?" Pierre took a step forward, exhaling a long drag of his cigarette, prepared to respond. Bang! Bang! The room exploded with sound. Guards jumped, hands flying to their guns. Pierre froze mid-step. Then, silence. A thick, suffocating silence. All eyes turned toward the front of the jail. Pierre's expression darkened. "What was that?" he barked at the guards near the entrance. No answer. Then, smash! Glass shattered, cascading across the floor like 1,000 glimmering diamonds. A massive figure, cloaked in black, crashed through the window in a perfect dive, rolling smoothly across the floor before rising to his feet. The motion was fluid, too fluid, almost inhuman. Before the guards could even react, twin revolvers flashed in the dim light. Boom! Boom! Eladium rounds erupted from the barrels, the blue-white explosions momentarily blinding everyone in the room. 2 guards were launched backward as if struck by lightning, their bodies hitting the walls with bone-shattering force. Their limbs twitched, muscles locked from the stunning energy. Before anyone could recover, Pierre went for his gun. But the masked figure was faster. He dropped a revolver mid-motion and lunged, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. Before Pierre could even draw, a gloved hand wrapped around his throat. With one effortless movement, the figure lifted Pierre off the ground and slammed him through the wooden desk. The entire room shook. Jack, still chained, could only stare, stunned at what he had just witnessed. The sheer speed, the power, the ferocity. It was unnatural. Pierre gasped for breath, his fingers clawing at the iron grip around his throat, but there was no budging it. His once arrogant face contorted into something new. Fear. The grip tightened. Pierre's struggles grew weaker. The room was still, every guard too stunned to move, too terrified to act. Then, finally, the masked figure let go. Pierre collapsed, choking, gasping desperately for air. He rolled onto his back, his pale face glistening with sweat. Above him, the masked man loomed, his presence suffocating. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and pulled the mask away. Pierre's eyes widened in sheer terror. Jack, still reeling, gasped in realization. The name left both their lips in unison. "Hot Hand." Jack's voice was filled with relief. But Pierre, his voice trembled, his lips quivering as though he had seen a ghost. "You're supposed to be dead," Pierre stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Hot Hand crouched, bringing his face within inches of Pierre's. His expression was calm, deadly. And then he spoke. "Where is she?" Pierre swallowed hard, his entire body shaking. And for the first time in his wretched life, Pierre Dupuis felt what it was like to be hunted. Jack's mind was a whirlwind of confusion, barely keeping up with the madness unfolding before him. Who the hell is Elizabeth? He thought as he struggled to comprehend what Hot Hand was demanding from Pierre. Could he be talking about Rachel? Still dazed and battered from the brutal beating, Jack tried to focus on what had just transpired. He had seen men fight before, but nothing like this. Nothing like Hot Hand Tim Riley. The speed, the power, it was unreal. The man had taken down 3 armed guards and Pierre Dupuis himself in mere seconds. And yet, as Jack caught his breath, he watched in shock as Pierre's fear twisted into something else. A slow, eerie chuckle bubbled up from the crumpled man. Then, laughter low at first, then rising into a spine-chilling cackle that echoed through the jailhouse. Pierre sneered up at Hot Hand, eyes glinting with malice. "Packing all Eladium rounds, huh, Mr. Riley?" He spat blood onto the floor and grinned, his lips curled in a sadistic smirk. "Kill me, and you'll never find your precious Elizabeth." Hot Hand's entire demeanor shifted. His ever-present calm shattered, replaced by raw, unfiltered rage. His teeth clenched, his fists balled so tightly his knuckles turned white. Jack had never seen Hot Hand lose control. With a roar of fury, Hot Hand snatched Pierre off the ground and slammed him into the floor. The wood cracked beneath the force. Then again, and again. Pierre's body hit the ground like a rag doll, his laughter replaced with choking gasps of pain. But Hot Hand knew better than to kill him. Not yet. In a single motion, Hot Hand drew his revolver, pressed it against Pierre's chest, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The Eladium round burst against Pierre's body with a blue-white shockwave. He spasmed violently, muscles locking up, his face frozen in a grotesque expression of pain and shock. The once powerful man was reduced to a rigid, helpless husk, unable to move. Only his terrified eyes flickered. Holstering his pistol, Hot Hand leaned in close, so close that Pierre could feel his breath against his cheek. "When I pull this gun on you again, Pierre," he whispered, voice low and lethal, "I promise you there won't be Eladium in those rounds." He leaned even closer, his voice barely above a growl. "I'm going to rain 5, 7 years of planning and vengeance on you, Pierre." He let the words sink in, the weight of his fury pressing against Pierre's frozen form. "The only thing you love is money. How long does it take to move again? 3, maybe 5 hours? That's all I need." He stood up, straightening his coat. "By the time you take your first step again, your mine will be nothing but rubble. Your men will fear my name more than they fear you. And when I'm done, you will have nothing." With that, Hot Hand turned his back on Pierre, not sparing him another glance. The escape plan. Jack, still hanging in his shackles, felt a sense of awe and relief as Hot Hand strode toward him. "I'm so happy to—" Jack started, but Hot Hand cut him off sharply. "Quiet. Just listen." Jack clamped his mouth shut. "Take the guns off those guards. They're holsters too. Load them with Eladium rounds and clean yourself up by the wash bucket. We're walking out the front door, and we're going to hope and pray no one heard anything." Jack opened his mouth to protest, but was immediately shut down. "You're taking midnight and riding straight for the hot springs. I'll meet you there at dawn." Jack furrowed his brows. "But I can help. You taught me how to "Shut up, Jack," Hot Hand snapped. His voice was sharp as a knife, his tone leaving no room for argument. Jack flinched. "You're beaten and bloodied. You have no battle experience. What I have to do, you'll only get in the way. This ain't a joke, kid. You can die." Hot Hand's eyes bore into him. "Do what I said. Meet me at the front door." Jack clenched his fists but obeyed. He wiped his bloodied face in the wash bucket, the cold water stinging against his swollen skin. Looking at his reflection in the rippling surface, he barely recognized himself, but there was no time for self-pity. Jack quickly looted the guards' weapons, securing the holsters and stuffing them with fresh Eladium rounds. He hurried to the front where Hot Hand was already waiting, his expression unreadable. "When we step out, stay glued to my hip. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Got it?" Jack nodded, tightening his grip on the revolver. "Got it." Hot Hand shoved open the door. The gauntlet. The night air was crisp, but there was no time to savor it. The moment they stepped onto the wooden porch, crack, 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 gunfire erupted. Bullets snapped against the ground, kicking up dust and splinters. They sprinted off the steps, diving over a horse trough for cover as more rounds ripped through the night. Jack froze. The panic clawed at his chest. His hands covered his ears, eyes squeezed shut. He curled up in the dirt, trying to make himself small. "This is it," he thought. "I'm going to die here." A hard slap cracked across his face. Jack's eyes flew open, staring directly into Hot Hand's fierce, unrelenting gaze. "Get a hold of yourself, kid. We're fine." The fear shattered. Jack snapped back into focus. More bullets zipped past them, shattering wooden posts and sending debris flying. Hot Hand wasn't fazed. His mind cleared, his ears muted the chaos. He turned his gaze to the right. Midnight, his horse, was on the outer edge of town. Then he looked past the alleyway to the back of the building. Jack followed his gaze. He understood. They nodded to each other. Hot Hand exhaled deeply. His hands moved methodically, shedding his long black overcoat, revealing the full arsenal strapped to his body. Jack watched, mesmerized, as Hot Hand pulled a lever-action rifle from his back, checked it once, then cocked it. He hugged the rifle to his chest, then looked at Jack. One final nod. Jack bolted for the alley. Hot Hand surged forward, hell unleashed. The rifle erupted, sending Eladium rounds bursting through the streets. Bodies flew back, stunned, locked in place. Jack turned once just as he reached the alleyway, and what he saw left him breathless. Hot Hand moved like a demon. Every motion was precise, deadly, unstoppable, sprinting from cover to cover, popping off rounds with inhuman speed, reloading without pause. Then, click. The rifle was empty. Without hesitation, Hot Hand dropped it and drew his double revolvers. Bang, bang, bang. Jack couldn't see the targets, but he saw bodies dropping. Then, boom. An explosion tore through the night, sending a fireball into the sky. Jack hit the ground, shielding himself. The shock wave rumbled through his chest. Heart pounding, he scrambled to his feet and ran. Reaching midnight, he untied her, leaped onto her back, and kicked off into the night. As the gunfire and explosions faded behind him, Jack whispered, "Good luck, Hot Hand." The night wind howled through the valley as Jack rode hard up the mountainside, the powerful strides of midnight carrying him further from the chaos of Montagne d'Or. With every gallop, he felt a sliver of safety creep into his bones. The flames and gunfire that had nearly consumed him were now behind him. He exhaled, allowing himself to breathe. The town was far below now, the winding path leading him toward the hot springs. He slowed Midnight to a trot, guiding her toward a narrow creek that cut through the rock. The journey had been hard on both of them, and as he dismounted, he could feel the exhaustion in his bones. Jack knelt beside the cool water, cupping his hands to drink before offering some to Midnight. The mare huffed softly, her dark coat slick with sweat, as she lapped up the water eagerly. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack looked back, and what he saw took his breath away. Montagne d'Or was on fire, not just the buildings, the entire town. Flames licked at the wooden structures, consuming everything in a raging inferno. The fire spread up the mountainside, moving unnaturally fast. Gunfire still crackled in the distance, but at a greatly diminished rate. Jack grinned. Hot Hand is winning. He strained his ears, listening carefully. He couldn't hear the distinct hum of Eladium rounds anymore, but as long as bullets were still ringing through the valley, Hot Hand was still fighting. Jack sat down beside the creek, taking a deep breath. His body ached. His face was sore, but he allowed himself a moment. A moment to take in the gigantic mountain looming over him and the burning town below. But then, boom! A shockwave rattled the valley, echoing up through the mountains. Jack snapped his head up just in time to see another explosion, then another. Bang, bang, bang. One by one, the explosions began to climb up the mountainside. Jack scrambled to his feet. He knew exactly where those explosions were headed. His eyes widened in disbelief as he followed the destruction, straight toward the top of the mountain. And then, a crescendo. A gigantic explosion burst through the summit of the mountain, shattering the night sky. Jack stumbled back. The mining operation, the very foundation of Pierre's wealth, was gone. Hot Hand wasn't just fighting Pierre's men. He was destroying everything Pierre owned. Jack watched in absolute awe. He couldn't process what he was witnessing. Hot Hand Riley wasn't just winning. He was erasing Pierre Dupuis from existence. Jack swallowed hard, then whirled around. There was no time to sit in amazement. He leapt back onto Midnight and kicked off into the darkness, pushing the horse harder up the mountainside toward the springs. Pierre Dupuis couldn't move. It had been hours since Hot Hand shot him with the Eladium round, leaving him completely paralyzed. He sat propped against the cold stone wall, unable to do anything but stare straight ahead. He could hear everything. The gunfire, the explosions, the roar of flames consuming his empire. Rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. Then, bootsteps. Slow, methodical. A whistle. That whistle. Pierre's blood ran cold. It was his whistle, the tune he used to hum while walking through his mine, lording over his workers. His heart pounded. He couldn't see the hallway, but the whistling was getting closer. The bootsteps stopped. Then, a hand grabbed him. Pierre felt himself yanked up, his limp body tossed like a rag doll against the wall. His head lolled to the side as his vision swam. And then, he saw him, Hot Hand Riley, standing before him, battered, bloodied, his face covered in dirt and sweat, and smiling. "Ah, there you go, Pierre," Hot Hand said, adjusting him so he sat upright. "See? I like to make eye contact when I have a conversation. I want you to see me." Pierre's breath shuddered. Hot Hand turned away, walking slowly toward the wooden chair in the corner of the cell. Whistle. Bootsteps. Pierre could feel it now, the fear. The same fear he put in others. Hot Hand dragged the chair in front of Pierre and sat down, calmly. He reached into Pierre's inner jacket pocket, pulling out a cigarette and lighter. He lit it with slow precision, took a long, deep drag, then blew the smoke directly into Pierre's face. Pierre's eyes burned. "You know, I've dreamed of this moment," Hot Hand said softly. Pierre tried to speak, but nothing came out. His throat felt like sandpaper. "For years I couldn't find Elizabeth, couldn't find where you sent her. Not after you thought your little assassin killed me." Pierre's stomach dropped. Hot Hand took another drag of his cigarette. "Your hitman got the drop on me, shot me right in the chest." Hot Hand tapped his chest, smirking. "I woke up the next morning with a sore chest and a pocket watch." Pierre's eyes twitched. Hot Hand pulled something from his pocket. "A gold pocket watch. She gave me this. 2nd anniversary." Hot Hand flicked his cigarette onto the floor. I don't need to tell you any more, Pierre. He leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. One of your men sold me the information you've been hiding from me for $100 of your own money. Then, Hot Hand laughed, a deep guttural laugh. I've laid waste to your men. He leaned back in the chair, stretching. Lit your town on fire. His eyes flickered with amusement. Tore your mind down, piece by piece. Pierre couldn't breathe. Wow, who knew TNT could pack such a punch? Hot Hand smirked. He stood up, holstered his weapons. You have nothing. His voice turned cold. You are nothing. Hot Hand took one last look at Pierre. I'm going to find Elizabeth. His tone darkened. And if she's harmed in any way, I will come back. A beat of silence. Then, bang, Pierre's head snapped back, his body locking up as a fresh Eladium round stunned him again. Jack sat quietly by the warm fire, staring at the flames. His mind raced. Then, Rachel. A sudden panic overtook him. Where is Rachel? He had been so caught up in the escape, so caught up in Hot Hand's destruction, that he hadn't even thought to get her. His stomach knotted. Then, a horse burst through the trees. Jack's head snapped up. The rider sprinted toward him. Hot Hand. Jack scrambled up as Hot Hand jumped off his horse, tying it up before diving straight into the spring. He came up roaring. Then, finally, he spoke. I know where she is. Jack's heart sank. Who? Rachel? Where is she? Hot Hand's piercing gaze locked onto Jack's. Yes, Rachel, he exhaled. She ain't far, Jack's fists clenched. She won't be easy to break free. Hot Hand muttered, and I ain't going for her. I'm going for Elizabeth. He stepped closer. If you're coming, you better be ready. I need a partner. Jack swallowed hard, then nodded. Hot Hand nodded back. We leave at first light.